everyone, welcome back. I'm your host Teresa, and today we're going to be covering the top 10 unsettling vintage photos that will leave you confused. To start us off, it doesn't matter if I'm dead or alive, you should invite me. Number 10 is skeletal dinner guest. For my people who hate to feel discluded, you'd probably love the members of the Post-Mortem Club. All members were present when they held their annual breakfast meeting, including club president J.M. McAdoo, who had died the previous year. You'll see in the photo presiding President Oakley Smith, club members, and the skeleton of Mr. McAdoo gathered together for breakfast with the skeleton at the head of the table. One of the rules of the club is that each member will will his or her skeleton to it for attendance to the club despite death. They even gave him a cigarette, as you can see, because smoking can't kill you if you're a skeleton. Number 9 is human depravity at its finest, the Stanford prison experiment. University professor Philip Zimbardo's execution of a power imbalance study in a prison ended disastrously. The Stanford prison experiment commenced on August 14th of 1971 with student volunteer groups comprising of 11 guards and 10 prisoners to see how they would behave on their own inside of a fabricated prison. The goal was to assess how quickly and intensely even educated or normal people can turn into cruel or sadistic ones under the right conditions, and man was it fast. 6 days in, Philip had to call off the experiment as guards were increasingly abusive to the inmates, spraying them with fire extinguishers, forcing them to clean toilets barehanded, denying them food, or just simply beating on them. The inmates and few guards who were visible minorities faced the worst treatment out of everyone. The study and the eerie photos of it inside left behind a chilling look at what humans are capable of. A killer's plea is number 8. Alright, so obviously someone who takes other people's lives shouldn't get to plea anything, but in the case of the 1946 lipstick killer, their plea wasn't one for freedom or for mercy. At a Chicago crime scene, the perpetrator used lipstick to write on the wall, quote, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill, I cannot control myself." This message may actually sound kind of familiar. It's because TV shows including Criminal Minds, Castle, Law and Order, and so many more have actually taken inspiration from this image and its written message for varying episodes. The man who had written this message, William Hirons, gets his wish as he's caught soon after. He was convicted, and at the time of Hirons' death in 2012, he'd been locked up for approximately 66 years, making him the longest serving inmate in the USA. William's message is a reminder that not all those who commit heinous crimes are in their right of mind, and sometimes they have no ability to control their actions. While it's not an excuse, it is an explanation. Number 7 is the sacrifice of Michael Rockefeller. Michael Rockefeller was the son of New York Governor and soon-to-be US Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, and he famously disappeared in Papua New Guinea in 1960s. This photo is of his first trip there. Rockefeller can be seen centered and smiling as indigenous peoples circle and run around him. Michael's known for his travels. He loved to visit the unexplored and untouched areas of society and learn about cultures many considered primitive. He saw the art and beauty in them. This desire for adventure took Rockefeller to the remote reaches of Papua New Guinea in 1961. They arrived near the island of Dutch on November 19th, and even though they were 12 miles from shore, Rockefeller reportedly told anthropologist Renee Wassing, "I think I can make it," and jumped into the water and headed for land and was never seen again. It's believed at first that he drowned, but Rockefeller had done a swim like that to shore actually multiple times. Because he was a member of a super rich American dynasty, there was a massive search. Ships, airplanes, helicopters, everything combed the region for any sign of him. They found nothing. National Geographic reporter Carl Hoffman offered a far more disturbing thesis than drowning in his 2014 book, Savage Harvest. The island Rockefeller swam to was inhabited by the Asmat, an uncontacted and primarily unfriendly indigenous clan. Hoffman claims to have uncovered evidence showing that Rockefeller made it to land, where he was then decapitated by the Asmat people before they ceremonially him, eating his brain and using his bones likely to make weaponry and other items. The confusing unanswered end of Rockefeller heir has since been debated, but it will always remain unsolved, sadly. Number 6 is we're leaving on a UFO. Not as catchy as a jet plane, but Marshall Applewhite was told by aliens it was a UFO indefinitely, so Marshall had been told a lot of things by the aliens, as had his wife before her passing. Affectionately self-dubbed as T and Do after the musical scales, they believe themselves to be of the highest caliber, like T and Do are on the scale. The cult these two began, Heaven's Gate, is famously recognized for the tragic mass departure members took on March 26 of 1997. It's on that day that the 39 members of the cult were convinced to consume a mixture of barbiturates and applesauce and then washed it down with vodka, as one member walked around to each poisoned person and tied bags over their heads to ensure asphyxiation. This mass taking of life was discovered days later when panicked family members of cult members hadn't heard from them. One former member went to go find his beloved wife, and well, I'm sure you can imagine what he found. What was confusing for many was to find the group covered in purple shrouds with their feet sticking out. They wore Nike sneakers with the classic white swoop. They believed these wings were going to carry them to the heavens. Countless photos were taken by FBI and police, most of which have been leaked to public by now and depict this very scene that I'm describing. Confusing and devastating, this loss was in international news and a reminder to always be aware of your own susceptibility to influence. Number 5 is the frozen man of Mount Everest. And yeah, I get it. We all know that there's tons of frozen bodies along Mount Everest, but that's not what I'm actually talking about this time. The photo you'll see is of mountain climber Beck Weathers, who in May of 1996 attempted to complete the final leg of the ascent on Everest. Despite how short the distance was, the journey caught up to Beck, and he came down with a case of snow blindness during an intense blizzard that had a wind chill of 100 degrees below zero, and he fell into a hypothermic coma. Initially, I thought I was in a dream, Weathers later recalled. Then I saw how badly frozen my right hand was, and that helped bring me around to reality. Beck was left for dead, first by his exhibition, and then the second time by a rescue crew doctor who believed him beyond saving. So it's only by miracle that Beck manages to break a hypothermic coma, turn around, and walk back to base camp. When he reaches camp, Beck is airlifted immediately as frostbite set in on his nose and hands, both of which are later amputated. This moment is caught in photograph and shows the frozen hand, and Beck visibly unconscious, being carried in a red sleeping bag. This ascent to Everest is remembered as the 1996 Mount Everest disaster and is famously covered in John Krakauer's book Thin Air and its 1997 adaptation, as well as films Everest and Everest 2015. So, by the way, they prematurely told Beck's wife and family he had passed away. Can you imagine that emotional roller coaster? Number 4 is the Maori Trophy Heads. The native Maori of New Zealand had a cultural practice of preserving severed heads of enemies for trophy and warning purposes. They are called mokomokai, and these heads were processed by first, of course, getting chopped off, but then boiled, smoked, and sun-dried. The Maori would then coat them in shark oil to prevent cracking and peeling before mounting them. When British colonizers invaded the land during the 1840s, the Maori heads were one of the famously pillaged artifacts and treasures of the colonial era. Major General Horatio Gordon Robley was in service for the British Army when they were invading and pillaging New Zealand in the 1960s. He was particularly enthralled by the Maori heads, and the absolute piece of you-know-what actually stole 35 of them for his own collection. You can see him in this photo, sitting at the base of a wall with Maori heads mounted upon it. Naturally, like most of what was stolen by British colonialists for the crown and or for themselves, these items were never returned to their rightful peoples and instead earned profit in British museums or collect dust in storerooms. Since the 1970s, New Zealand has had a strong record of requesting those remains back from overseas. The first major international reparation of a toy moko happened in 1985, and in 2003, New Zealand created its first government-funded international reparations program. It's now seen the return of 800 Maori and Moriori remains. Number 3 is the Ruhr Demonstration, an image caught by police officers as the Ruhr himself, Joachim Kroll, reenacts one of the crimes after his capture. Kroll was very particular about how he killed, and only doing so in the same place on a few occasions and years apart. This and the fact of the number of other killers operating in the area at the time, it helped him evade capture. This killer started in 1955 and didn't stop for 2 decades until his capture. He's known to have taken 14 lives without any rhyme or reason, no preference for age, gender, race, status, everyone was on the table. Pun intended, unfortunately, as Kroll wasn't just necrophilic with the bodies, he ate them too. After taking their lives and using their bodies, he would bring home pieces to cook. He was finally caught in 1976 after police discovered intestines from one of his victims clogging the plumbing of the apartment building. Police reported that when a neighbor had asked Kroll about them and if he knew what had backed up the pipes earlier, Kroll simply replied, guts. Why the police felt the need to reenact his crime photos, I'm not sure, but the result is several photos of Kroll propped over a volunteer in the park, looking full of ecstasy and primal delight that'll send a shiver down your spine. Number 2 is the tragic death of cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov. So, imagine knowing you're going to die but still walking aboard. That is what this Soviet astronaut Vladimir did on April 23, 1967. The craft had shown countless issues and flaws during testing, to an extent where it wasn't even just Vladimir who knew this was going to happen. It was everyone working the project. So why did it go forward despite clear danger? No one was willing to back out and risk the fury or disappointment of the Soviet high command, so Vladimir could have backed out himself, but it would have doomed the next astronaut to be put on the project, who happened to be his close friend, Yuri Gagarin. So he was assigned to the mission, and he decided he would do it and spare anyone else. Upon re-entry to Earth, the tragedy happens. The craft's parachute fails, and the Soyuz craft hurtled to Earth at unthinkable speeds, burning Vladimir alive inside. Photos of the craft were taken after its impact, showing a horrific scene of melted plastics, metal, and char. He became the first human to to ever die in spaceflight, and Vladimir himself was so confident this would be the case that he asked for an open casket funeral that'd force his superiors to see what they'd done to him. And so the second famous photo of this incident is taken, Vladimir's superiors standing over the mangled bunch of melted and charred human bones with nauseated horror in their gaze. And so, in at number 1 is what's considered the creepiest photo ever taken by the internet, Brocken Blanche Monnier. This is a real-life horror story. Blanche is born in 1849 and starts life living lavishly and beloved in her prominent French family home, ingrained with ideas of Prince Charming and happily ever afters. She remains unmarried into her 20s, however, and searches desperately for her true love so she may move away from her domineering mother. It's in 1874 that her wish is granted, and she meets an older man of status and intends to marry him. But Mama disagrees, and she's not feeling he's suitable and she needs someone else. Blanche is furious. He can support her, he's high class, a lawyer, that's everything her mother demanded she finds, and she finally found it. Blanche finally put her foot down against her mother, and her mother makes her regret it for decades to come. Blanche is locked away in the attic closet. There are no windows and only a hay mattress. Once a day, her mother would cram dinner scraps under the doorway for her to eat. Blanche's mother reminds her every day that if she gives up on her betrothed, she would free Blanche. Blanche refuses every time, even after her fiance, unbeknownst to her, passes away in 1885 while she's still imprisoned. It wouldn't have mattered, however. The public had been told by her mother that Blanche had been dead since she locked her away in 1874, so everyone just thought that was the case. Blanche, meanwhile, survived 16 years in this closet until an anonymous note to police by a maid forces authorities to search the home. They find Blanche, now middle-aged, malnourished, covered in sores and fecal matter, surrounded by vermin and rot. This moment is caught on film by police. You'll see Blanche sitting on her bed, an excited yet lost expression on her face. Her mother and brother were both charged, and her mother very quickly and deservedly dies in prison, while her brother manages to appeal and escape justice. Blanche is left a shell of a person from 16 years of solitary and dark confinement. She spent the rest of her life in a psychiatric care at one of the state's best hospitals, the sole heir to her mother's precious fortune and status. Well, this has been another historical photo video for you guys, and I hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe to see more Bumblebee content, and comment down below what you think your most unsettling or confusing photo is. Mine is of my cat running away with a sleeve of saltine crackers in his mouth, because why?